Actually, David, my brother, he's 6 years older than me. He lived with my grandmother until he was 4, I think, because Mum was sick after he was born. I think they called it milk fever in those days. And David was jaundiced, very jaundiced. And my grandmother came from Hobart, grandmother Mitchell, on my father's side, because her son was crying on the telephone the other end. She just took her hands out of the dishwashing dish and said, I've got to go round to the West Coast, which wasn't easy in those days. Tommy Dalton was the West Coast representative in Parliament, and my aunt knew him, and she asked him when was he going round to the West Coast, and he said he'll go tomorrow. So he took her around.
And she was there for how long?
I don't know, years. She stopped there because she went to the hospital to see my mum, who was sick, and she asked the nurse where the baby was. And they said, oh, he was in the nursery. He was just left there to die. So she said, well, if he's going to die, I'll take him home. Mum couldn't feed the baby, and the baby being jaundiced, I presumed it couldn't suck. So he was pretty sick, and he was sent home to die. That was my Auntie Fina's story. And then my grandmother used to give him a formula, which he would bring up immediately, and she worked on the assumption that he might keep something down. So she kept feeding him bottle after bottle. He lived through it all, and she kept him. And then one particular day my mother just went down and demanded him back. No 5 minutes notice or anything.
But your mother wasn't home for David. Your grandmother, Mitchell, looked after him, so she was at home.
Yes.
But your mother, where was she?
Oh, she was... actually, it just happened to be a few houses up the street, in Crotty Street. Oh, excuse me.
How old was David when you were born?
He was 6.
So 6 years.
But in between, Brendan was born. Brendan, my second brother, he was 2 years younger than David. So she had a 2-year-old when she demanded David back.
That 2-year period when she was raising her second child, she was considered to be of fit mind to do that. But she didn't take the initiative to get her first child back from her mother-in-law.
You know how you try and work out these things. Mum was a spoilt child in as much as she had everything you could have and buy, and best education. And then she was married young, then she was sick, and she had a husband that loved her very much and looked after her. So I think Mum was used to getting her own way. She was always a smart dresser, quite good looking.